I used to believe that buying a diamond was one of the safest financial decisions an ordinary person could make. Growing up, I had heard people compare diamonds to gold so often that I never questioned it. If something was beautiful, rare, and certified as genuine, surely it would hold its value. That assumption stayed with me for years until I finally reached a point where I felt comfortable spending more money on something luxurious than I ever had before. I remember standing under the bright lights of a jewelry store while the salesperson carefully placed a diamond ring on a black velvet tray. Everything about the presentation made the stone seem timeless. The certificate was printed on thick paper. Every number was explained with confidence. Color, clarity, cut, and carat all sounded like scientific proof that I was buying something that would always be valuable. When I hesitated at the price, the salesperson smiled and said, "A quality diamond isn't just beautiful, it's something you'll always have." Those words settled every doubt I had. I left the store feeling proud, almost relieved, as if I had turned a large amount of cash into something equally secure. For a long time, I barely thought about it again. The ring stayed safely stored most days because I was afraid of scratching it. And whenever I looked at it, I felt a quiet satisfaction. Then life changed in ways I hadn't planned. A series of unexpected expenses arrived within a few months. Nothing dramatic happened. There wasn't a disaster or emergency. It was simply one of those stretches of adulthood where several ordinary problems appear at the same time. Repairs, family obligations, and delayed payments slowly drained my savings. One afternoon I looked around my apartment, wondering what I could sell quickly without borrowing money. My eyes landed on the small box containing the ring. I actually felt comforted. At least I have this, I thought. It may even be worth more now. I walked into a jewelry buyer's office, carrying the certificate and the original receipt, expecting the process to be simple. The buyer examined the stone through a magnifying loupe for only a few minutes before typing numbers into a computer. Then he calmly quoted a price that was far lower than I expected. I honestly thought he had misunderstood something. I slid the receipt across the desk and pointed at the amount I had paid. He looked at it, nodded politely, and said, "I don't doubt that's what you paid." I asked, almost defensively, "But it's a real diamond, it's certified." He nodded again. "Yes, it's genuine." I waited for the rest of the sentence, convinced he was about to correct himself. Instead, he simply repeated the offer. I thanked him, left the office, and sat on a nearby bench, feeling confused more than angry. My first reaction was that I must have chosen the wrong buyer. Over the next several days I visited several more places. Every offer was disappointingly similar. Some were even lower. At one point, I became convinced that everyone was trying to take advantage of me. A friend listened patiently while I complained over coffee. Instead of agreeing with me, he asked a question I hadn't considered. "Did you ever look at what people are actually willing to pay for second-hand diamonds?" I admitted I hadn't. That evening I searched online and found countless listings where perfectly genuine diamonds had been sitting unsold for months. Some sellers had lowered their prices again and again, with almost no interest. I couldn't understand it. If diamonds were so valuable, why wasn't anyone buying them? Curious, I began reading articles and watching interviews with people in the jewelry business. That's when I stumbled across an idea that completely changed the way I looked at value. I learned about liquidity, a word I had heard before but never truly understood. One explanation compared different assets in a surprisingly simple way. A glass of water in the middle of a city costs very little because almost anyone can find another one. The exact same glass of water becomes incredibly valuable to someone stranded in a desert because demand changes instantly. Value is never created by the object alone. It also depends on how easily someone else wants it at that moment. I had always assumed authenticity guaranteed demand. It doesn't. That realization stayed with me because it explained more than just my diamond. A few days later, I returned to one of the buyers, not to negotiate, but simply to ask questions. Without trying to sell me anything, he patiently explained that retail jewelry prices include many costs beyond the stone itself. Store rent, insurance, marketing, manufacturing, inventory, warranties, and profit margins all become part of the price customers pay. The moment a diamond leaves the store, those additional costs don't transfer to the next buyer. They disappear. I had never thought about that before. I wasn't really comparing the same thing when I looked at my receipt and the resale offer. One represented a retail experience. The other reflected what the wholesale market believed the stone could realistically sell for again. That conversation didn't magically make me happy about losing money, but it replaced frustration with understanding. Once I started noticing liquidity, I saw it everywhere. Around the same time, one of my relatives decided to close a small business that had looked successful from the outside. The shop was attractive, customers came every day. Yet when it came time to sell the business, almost nobody expressed interest. I remember helping sort through shelves and equipment while hearing the repeated sentence, "Everyone likes shopping here, but nobody wants to own it." Watching that happen reminded me of my own experience. Something could appear valuable while being surprisingly difficult to sell. Then I thought about a former coworker who had spent more than a decade mastering software that hardly any company still used. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't untalented. He simply discovered that expertise alone wasn't enough if demand disappeared. Listening to him describe months of unsuccessful job applications felt strangely familiar. He kept saying, "I know I can do the work." Employers weren't questioning his ability. They just needed different skills. It occurred to me that people could have liquidity problems too, although nobody called it that. The more I reflected, the more I realized I'd been asking the wrong question whenever I evaluated something important. I always asked whether it was good. I rarely asked who would still want it later. That shift quietly changed the way I made decisions. Before paying for expensive courses, I started researching whether employers actually sought those skills. Before buying collectible items, I looked at completed resale transactions instead of advertised prices, because I discovered another fact that surprised me. Asking prices reveal what sellers hope for. Completed sales reveal what buyers actually paid. That small difference changed how I interpreted markets. It sounds obvious now, but I had spent years confusing the two. I also became more aware of my own professional life. For a while I had focused almost entirely on becoming better at my work, while assuming that quality alone would eventually be noticed. Looking back, I realized many capable people remained invisible simply because very few people knew what they could do. I started sharing my projects more openly, having conversations I previously avoided, and accepting opportunities to collaborate instead of working quietly by myself. None of that happened overnight. It felt uncomfortable at first, because I worried it might seem like self-promotion. Instead, it simply made my work easier for the right people to find. Months later, someone contacted me about an opportunity because another person had mentioned my name during a conversation I wasn't even part of. That moment reminded me of the diamond sitting in my drawer. Hidden things can remain valuable for years without anyone recognizing their worth. Eventually, I did sell the ring. The final price still stung, but strangely, I didn't feel cheated anymore. I felt like I had paid for an education that no classroom had ever offered. As I walked away after completing the paperwork, I realized the biggest mistake hadn't been buying the diamond. It had been assuming that value existed independently from other people. I used to believe worth was a fixed property that lived inside an object forever. Now I understood it was partly a relationship between the thing being offered and the people willing to receive it. Ever since then, whenever I find myself excited about an investment, a purchase, a skill, or even a long-term commitment of time, another question quietly joins the conversation in my mind. I still care whether something is genuine, useful, or well-made, but almost without thinking, I also wonder what happens if life changes unexpectedly and I need to let it go. I never ask that question because I expect everything to fail. I ask it because one ordinary afternoon, sitting on a bench outside a jewelry buyer's office with a certified diamond in my pocket, and far fewer options than I thought I had, showed me that authenticity alone is only part of the story. And once I understood the difference between having value and having someone ready to recognize that value at the exact moment I needed it, I found myself looking at nearly everything in life through an entirely different lens.